I don't think I'll ever forget the sound of her fork hitting the side of the glass. It was one of those antique champagne flutes, tall, delicate, my mother's, and the way it rang out against the quiet chatter of our guests made my stomach clench before she even opened her mouth. We were at the head table. My hand still had a faint tremble from the ceremony. Paul was sitting beside me smiling like nothing could ever touch him. That was his strength. Or his curse. He knew how to wear calm like armor. Marissa stood from her seat across the hall. Yes, my cousin, my blood. And raised her glass with the kind of grace that made me sick in hindsight. Her dress was cream tight. No one wears cream to a wedding unless they want eyes. I just want to say she started voice steady, even, sweet, that I'm so happy for Paul and Elaine. That pause. God, that pause. She smiled wider, then rested her other hand gently across her stomach. And I'm even more thrilled to tell you all that I'm carrying Paul's child. Let me know where you're listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this story speaks to you, share your thoughts below. Don't skip, because what happens at the end will surprise you more than the betrayal itself. People didn't gasp right away. It was more like a delayed current running through the room. A few chuckles, nervous, unsure, then a swell of confused murmurs. My Aunt June actually dropped her wine glass. I remember the red stain on the white tablecloth. Looked like a wound. Paul froze, turned toward her like he didn't understand English. I turned toward him like I did. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I reached for my wine and took a sip. Then I said, clear and calm, "That's fascinating, Marissa. Would you like to tell everyone who the father actually is?" That's when the room really fell silent, because they didn't know I already knew. And they sure as hell didn't know that everything they were watching, this chaos, this collapse, had been arranged. By me. You have to understand something. I didn't come into love easily. I was 61 when I met Paul. I had buried a marriage before, raised 2 sons who rarely called, and spent the better part of my 50s taking care of my mother until she passed. I wasn't naive, but I was tired. Tired of waking up to silence, of sitting in restaurants by myself, of wondering if the second half of my life was just going to be a slow waiting room for death. Then Paul came in like spring. Early spring, messy, a little muddy, but full of promise. We met at the library of all places. He needed help with the printer. I was waiting to scan some medical forms. He was charming in a grown man sort of way. Not slick, not overly rehearsed. Just kind. And after years of caregiving, bitterness and quiet bedrooms, kindness can feel like water to someone dying of thirst. We dated for a year before he moved in, another before he proposed, and through all of it, Marissa was there. My cousin, my sister, and everything but blood. We were raised more like twins than relatives. She never had kids, never married. She floated between jobs, boyfriends, drama. But I never shut her out. Even when she asked to stay with us for a few weeks after her lease fell through. Even when she stayed for almost 6 months. Even when I saw her in the hallway at midnight barefoot wearing one of my robes. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was projecting, that I had finally found a man who cared for me, and I wasn't going to let paranoia ruin it. But my gut never let go. It sat there, waiting, watching. And when the pieces started shifting the long walks, he took alone the sudden overcompensation with gifts, the little looks they exchanged when they thought I wasn't watching. I knew. Not just suspected. Knew. But I didn't confront. That's not who I am. See, I've learned something in life. Shouting doesn't win wars, but silence that can bring a kingdom to its knees. So I waited. I made no mention of it. I planned the wedding, let Paul pick the menu, let Marissa help with the centerpieces. I smiled and laughed and nodded like a woman in love. And then I picked the venue, a family-owned vineyard, beautiful, isolated, with a guest list tightly controlled by me. No open mic speeches. Just one moment after dinner when I asked if anyone had something they wanted to say before we cut the cake. Marissa stood before I even finished the sentence. Paul's hand twitched. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. And I knew what she was about to say, because I had sent her a note the week before. A card left on her vanity, no name. Just 6 handwritten words, "If you don't tell them, I will." And I guess she figured she'd rather control the explosion than wait for me to light the fuse. What she didn't realize was that I had already buried the matches. She tried to recover, of course. When I asked her that question about the real father, her face cracked. Just a flicker, but enough. Paul tried to play it cool, said it was a misunderstanding, that they had been supporting each other through something I wouldn't understand. The man was always good with half-truths, but the room didn't buy it. Not after the photos I had quietly placed at each table. Old snapshots, seemingly random. But if you looked close, if you really looked, you'd see it. His hand on her lower back, her robe in his laundry basket, her necklace on our bedroom dresser. Little things, little truths, hidden in plain sight. No one noticed until that moment, until everything snapped into place like a jigsaw puzzle you can't unsee. By then it was too late for them, but not for me. I stood, raised my glass. "To truth," I said, and walked out. I used to think love was a one-time thing, that you found it or you didn't, that if it slipped through your fingers once you weren't meant to hold it again. That's what my first marriage taught me. Michael and I married when I was 22. We were both young, poor, and stubborn enough to think that was enough. And for a while it was. We built a life together the hard way by sharing everything, the bills, the arguments, the grief. He worked construction. I taught kindergarten. We lived in a small bungalow 2 blocks from where I grew up. I thought we were happy, but there's a kind of silence that creeps into a marriage when love goes to sleep. Not a loud, angry silence. No slammed doors, just quiet. Cold coffee in the morning, missed calls, separate blankets. By the time we hit 30, I was pregnant with our second boy, and he was already halfway out the door. Not physically, he never left me until the end, but emotionally, he'd been gone for years. When the cancer came, I stayed, not out of love by then, but duty. I held his hand when he couldn't hold mine back. I buried him wearing the watch I gave him for our 10th anniversary, the one he never wore. After Michael, I didn't date for almost 15 years. I poured myself into motherhood, teaching, church, taking care of my mother when her mind started to go. I was everyone's rock, everyone's shoulder, but no one ever asked what I needed. By the time I turned 59, I had made peace with it. I had a quiet life, a decent pension, and a garden that didn't ask questions. Then Paul showed up. It wasn't some fairy tale. I didn't see him and hear violins. He came to the library with a crumpled sheet of printer paper and a frustrated look. I was at the scanning station trying to upload a form for Mom's prescription subsidy. "Do you know how to work this thing?" he asked me, half laughing, clearly out of his element. He wasn't handsome in a magazine way, more in the way of someone who'd aged into himself. Soft eyes, strong jaw. He had a little scar above his lip. said it came from a hockey game in '78. We talked about books. He'd been a history teacher before retiring early, something about burnout and divorce. I didn't ask for details. He didn't offer. What struck me wasn't his charm, it was his kindness. He listened. Not the fake kind where someone's just waiting for their turn to speak. No, Paul heard things. He noticed the bandage on my wrist from pruning roses, asked about my mother's health without trying to fix it. He made space for grief like he wasn't afraid of it. That's what made me fall. We started slow. Coffee at Tim's. Walks through the nature trail near the river. One winter, we got stuck on an icy road coming back from a Christmas market, and he sang Gordon Lightfoot songs in the dark until the tow truck came. I laughed so hard that night, I forgot what loneliness felt like. When he moved in, it wasn't dramatic. We were already living like partners. He started leaving toothbrushes, extra socks. Then it was his books, his flannel shirts. One day I looked up and he was part of the house. And then came the proposal. He asked me in the kitchen holding a small box and a plate of blueberry pancakes. He didn't kneel. Said he couldn't do it without making a noise he'd regret. I laughed so hard I almost dropped my coffee. The ring was simple. Gold, no stone. I don't need a diamond, he said. You've already been through the fire. I said yes, not because I was dizzy in love, but because I believed finally I was safe. We set the date for September, just after the leaves start to turn but before the frost. My mother had passed the year before, and I felt ready to step into something new, something ours. I invited 40 people, small, intimate, just family and a few old friends. Marissa offered to help. I didn't ask, she volunteered, said it was her way of thanking me for all the years I stood by her through her nonsense. And she had plenty. Marissa was always a whirlwind. Men, money, careers that burned out as fast as they began. But I never gave up on her. When her mom died, she came to stay with me for a while. Said it'd only be 2 weeks. It turned into months. Paul was the one who told me to let her stay. She's family, he said. She's hurting. Looking back now, that's the first time I remember feeling off. There was something about the way he said it. Too soft. Too concerned. But I was planning a wedding. I didn't want to stir anything up, so I shut it down. Told myself I was being paranoid. That's what we do, isn't it? We silence ourselves for the sake of others. The thing about planning a wedding at my age is you don't care about chair covers or color schemes. You care about meaning. We chose a vineyard I loved, one where Michael and I had once gone for our anniversary. I know how strange that sounds, but I wasn't haunted by Michael anymore. The place was beautiful, peaceful. Paul didn't question it. I picked burgundy and cream for the colors, not trendy, just warm. Marissa came dress shopping with me, sat in the corner scrolling through her phone. When I asked her opinion, she barely looked up. They're all fine, she said. Just pick one. I did. And she tried it on 2 weeks later when she thought I was out. I found a lipstick smudge on the collar. One I don't own. I didn't say a word. I put the dress in a garment bag and moved it to the back of the closet. Then I started watching. Not obsessively, just closely. The way she touched his arm when she laughed. How he made her coffee just the way she liked it without asking. The tension that would snap into the air when I entered the room. Still, I told myself, Elaine, don't start imagining ghosts in the mirror. But the mirror never lies. And neither did my gut. I kept planning, quietly, purposefully, and I started leaving little tests. My perfume on his pillow, a photo of me and Paul by the nightstand, A text sent to Marissa's phone by accident, one where I asked Paul if he could pick up milk. Nothing urgent, just visible. Each time there'd be a shift, a stutter in conversation, a look exchanged too fast. By the time we reached the rehearsal dinner, I already knew, but I needed her to say it. I needed them to show it. Because when a woman like me decides to burn the house down, she doesn't light a match. She opens every window and lets the storm in. People don't cheat in big, loud moments. It's not always lipstick on collars or perfume that doesn't belong to you. Sometimes it starts with laughter. A shared joke at the dinner table. A glance held a beat too long while you're washing dishes. That's how it began with Paul and Marissa. Not with betrayal, but with ease. They got too comfortable with each other, and I let them. I wanted to believe in the good, in the family I thought I had. I remember one night, it was late April. Paul had been working on the garage door opener, said it was stuck, kept making a grinding noise. He came in hands covered in grease. I told him to wash up, and Marissa, sitting on the couch with her feet tucked under her like a teenager, said, "I'll help you clean it up, Paul." I was in the kitchen wiping down the counter, listening. He chuckled. "You're not scared of a little grease." And she said, "You'd be surprised what I'm not scared of." That moment right there, it slid past me at the time like warm honey, thick, slow, sticky. But later when I played it back in my head, it curdled. It wasn't about the words, it was the tone, the familiarity, the kind of familiarity you don't get from being cousins-in-law. It got worse after the engagement. Paul and I had been looking at wedding venues. We'd narrowed it down to 3. Marissa offered to come along, said she needed a little beauty in her life. At one of the vineyard tours, we were walking through the old cellar with the manager, and I hung back a bit to look at some of the historic photos on the wall. When I turned around, I saw the two of them laughing about something, heads close. Too close. Paul had his hand on the small of her back. A gentle touch. Almost nothing. But no man touches another woman like that when his fiancé is in the room unless something's already rotted between the walls. They pulled apart the second they noticed me. Marissa smiled like she hadn't just betrayed me. Paul said nothing at all. I told myself it was the wine, the lighting, the pressure of planning. That lie kept me warm for exactly 2 weeks. Then came the credit card bill. Paul and I shared a joint account for wedding expenses. Nothing fancy, just one we used to track deposits for the venue catering the photographer. But there was a charge that didn't belong a hotel in the city, not where we were staying for the honeymoon, not where any of our vendors were located. It was a boutique hotel, the kind with Egyptian cotton sheets and nothing under $300 a night. I circled it in red, waited. That night, while we sat watching one of those true crime shows he liked, I asked casually, "Did you have to meet with the photographer in the city?" He blinked. "No." "Why, just wondering," I said, sipping my tea. "Strange charge on the card." He barely paused. "Oh, I think I used that when I was checking on the flowers. I must have put the wrong card down. I'll fix it." The lie was smooth. Practiced. Too practiced. I didn't press. Instead, I logged into the hotel's website the next day, called under the pretense of confirming a reservation. I gave them the date. The woman on the phone said, yes, that room was checked in by a Mr. Paul Henley and a guest. Marissa Robichaud. My hand went cold. She asked if I wanted to make another reservation. I thanked her and hung up. That's when I stopped doubting myself. You'd think I'd confront him, march into the living room and slap him across the face like something out of a movie, but that's not who I am. That's not how I survive. Instead, I started paying attention to everything. The way Marissa always wore makeup on days Paul was home, how she stopped helping with wedding plans and instead lingered in the background like a ghost with perfect nails. I checked laundry loads, noticed his towels had lipstick stains, colors I didn't own. He changed his cologne, started wearing button-downs instead of t-shirts when working from home. Marissa giggled more. He smiled less around me. They thought they were clever. They weren't. I began to test them, left little traps, subtle ones. Moved his car keys to the guest room drawer. Waited to see if he noticed. He didn't. Borrowed Marissa's phone to check the time and watched her snatch it back like I'd grabbed her diary. Once I dropped a pair of lace underwear I found in the hallway. They weren't mine. She picked them up without blinking and said, "Oh, I was looking for these." In front of Paul. He flinched. Tiny cracks, but cracks, all the same. I wasn't planning revenge then. Not yet. I just wanted to see. To know. I needed the truth to stop being a shapeless suspicion. But the real tipping point. It came 2 months before the wedding. I walked in on them. Not in bed. Not kissing. No, I wasn't that lucky. I found them in the garage talking in hushed voices. The door was slightly ajar. I was coming in from the garden. Marissa was crying. "I don't want to do this anymore," she whispered. "It's eating me alive." Paul said nothing for a second. Then he said, "Just hold on until after the wedding." That one sentence ended any hope I had that this was just a mistake. They were planning to deceive me, to marry me, to live this lie until it served them. That's when something inside me went still. Not broken, just cold. I walked away from the door, quietly, carefully. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I picked up the roses I'd been trimming, and I went back to pruning like nothing had happened, because that's when I decided I wasn't going to stop the wedding. I was going to finish it. People always say, "Why would you go through with it if you knew?" But they don't understand the power of letting someone bury themselves. If I had called it off, they'd have denied everything, claimed I was hysterical, overthinking, jealous. But if I let them show who they were, if I gave them the rope, they'd hang themselves for me. And that's exactly what I did. Marissa was already unraveling. She couldn't hold the secret. She wanted to confess, wanted drama, wanted it all to explode. So I set the stage. Every invitation, every floral arrangement, every seat in that room was a chess piece. They thought they were playing me, but I had rewritten the rules long before the game began. After I overheard them in the garage, I stopped trying to win. Stopped trying to be the perfect fiancé, the smiling host, the woman who made everything easy. I gave up that role without a speech. No announcement. No breakdown. I just went quiet. It's amazing what people reveal when they think you're not looking anymore. I didn't stop the wedding plans. I moved through them like a ghost with a checklist. Showed up to tastings, smiled through vendor calls. Let Paul believe I was distracted by linen samples and hors d'oeuvres. In truth, I was building a case. Every minute I stayed silent, I was watching. Every time I didn't react, I was recording. I bought a small audio recorder on Amazon, nothing fancy, slipped it under the couch cushions, in the laundry room, in the glove compartment of Paul's car. I wasn't hoping for a confession. I wanted proof of intent. And I got it. 2 weeks before the wedding, while I was at yoga, Marissa came by. I know this because I played the tape back later that night while drinking tea alone in the upstairs bedroom. Paul's voice was flat, tired. You said you weren't going to come here anymore. Then Marissa's voice low and sharp. I had to see you. I need to know what's happening after the wedding. He hesitated. Then we'll figure it out. Just let's get through the day. Okay, you love me. I didn't say that. Silence. Then Marissa, bitter as poison. You're a coward. He didn't argue. That told me everything. He didn't love her. He didn't love me either. He loved comfort, access, familiarity, a warm body in each direction. He wanted options, and I decided right then he would lose all of them. I started drawing boundaries without explanation. Marissa asked to borrow my car. I told her no without offering a reason. Paul tried to initiate intimacy one night. I told him I had a headache, then another. I moved my important files, the deed insurance policies, joint accounts into a lockbox. Not one he had the key for. I booked a separate room for the night before the wedding. Told him it was a bride's tradition. He nodded, pretending not to be relieved. I had the locks on the house changed the morning of the ceremony. I also had a lawyer on retainer, and a sealed envelope with my will, my final wishes, and a full statement of marital fraud prepared in case something happened to me. No, I wasn't afraid of violence. I was afraid of being erased. Because when you've spent your whole life making space for others, you learn that people think you're easy to remove. I wasn't. Marissa grew more frantic the closer we got to the wedding. She started dropping odd comments at the dinner table. You sure you want to go through with it, Elaine? Or marriage is hard even for the best couples? She thought I'd crumble, that I'd sense the storm brewing and run. But I've lived through worse storms, and I've always stayed dry. One night she came into my room holding a glass of wine. You remember when we were little, she asked, and I told you I'd marry your first boyfriend? I nodded. Funny how some things don't change, she said. Then she smiled, slow, cruel, and left. That was the moment I stopped seeing her as family. She wasn't my cousin anymore. She was a woman who envied my stability and wanted it for herself. Not because she loved him, but because she wanted to win. So I let her think she had. Paul was quieter that last week, kept checking his phone, leaving the room to take calls. I never asked who. I didn't need to. I spent those days planting seeds, small ones. I printed out photos. I'd found screenshots of messages on Paul's phone receipts, and a particularly damning selfie Marissa had taken in our bathroom mirror wearing his shirt. I didn't confront him. I put the photos in envelopes, one for each table at the wedding, slid under plates, marked with guests' names, sealed. Then I wrote a note for each one. Ask Paul about this. After dessert. It wasn't revenge. It was revelation. Let them all see who they were dealing with. The night before the wedding, I slept like a child. Not because I was at peace, not quite, but because I was ready. I wasn't scared of the pain anymore. Pain is clean. You bleed, you bandage, you heal. It's the pretending that rots you from the inside out. And I had stopped pretending. I showed up the next morning early, hair curled, dress steamed, makeup subtle but sharp. People hugged me, kissed my cheek, told me how beautiful I looked. Marissa wore white. Off-white, but still. No one said anything. Paul smiled the entire ceremony like a man trying not to sweat through his shirt. He kissed me at the altar, held my hand too tightly. I squeezed back. Hard. At the reception just before dinner, I stood and made a toast. "Thank you all for being here," I said. "It means the world to us. Family is everything." And sometimes I looked at Marissa. Family teaches us our hardest lessons. She smiled like she didn't hear it. Paul drank his champagne. After the meal, I gave the floor to anyone who wanted to share a few words. Marissa didn't hesitate. She stood, clinked her glass, and spoke with the confidence of a woman who thought the world belonged to her. I let her talk, let her confess, let her believe she held the knife. Then I stood up, took my glass, and turned the blade around. "You say you're carrying Paul's child," I said. "That's bold, especially when you're not even sure who the father is." Gasps. Forks dropped. Marissa froze. Paul tried to speak, but I held up a hand. "I had a test done," I said calmly. "Paternity, conducted independently. Results came in yesterday." My voice never rose, but the room leaned in like I'd shouted, "The child's father is not Paul. Congratulations, Marissa. You lied for nothing." And with that, I raised my glass again. "To the truth." Then I walked out of the room. Not a tear shed, not a word more said, because silence when earned is louder than any scream. I didn't cry until I got to the car, not out of heartbreak, not even out of anger. It was release. Years of holding everything in, the caregiving, the betrayal, the pretending, the silence, all of it finally cracked. And what spilled out wasn't grief. It was power. I'd planned every moment of that wedding knowing exactly how it would end. But still watching Marissa's face go white in real time, seeing Paul blink like a deer in headlights while everyone stared, it was more surreal than satisfying. I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. I felt clean, like something had been cut out of me, something rotting I'd been living with for far too long. I didn't drive straight home. I drove to the lake. It was the place my father used to take me when I was little, before life got hard, before my mother started unraveling, and before I learned how lonely a woman can be even in a full house. I sat there for hours, the dress still clinging to me like a costume I was finally done wearing. I peeled off the earrings, took off the shoes, and let my feet sink into the cool grass. No one called. Not Paul. Not Marissa. Not even my sons. I suppose they didn't know what to say, or they were too stunned, or maybe, just maybe, they knew they'd been outplayed. The days that followed were a blur, not the kind of blur where everything happens too fast, the kind where everything stops. Silence filled every room of my house. Not peaceful silence, tense, humming silence, like the air itself was waiting for the next shoe to drop. Paul texted me that night. A single message. "We need to talk." I didn't respond. Not because I was avoiding him, but because he no longer existed to me in that way. The man I thought I loved, he'd died somewhere between the hotel receipt and the lie he told at the cellar. What remained was someone I had outgrown, outwitted, outlasted. The next morning I packed a small bag. Just clothes, papers, my mother's locket. I checked into a motel off the highway. Not fancy, not particularly clean, but it gave me space. Space to think, to prepare. Because I wasn't done. The wedding may have been the fall, but I hadn't dropped the curtain yet. The next day I sent an email. Short, formal, direct. To Paul, I'm filing for annulment on grounds of fraud. All shared assets are frozen pending review. Please forward any communication through counsel. I will not be returning home. I copied my lawyer. I made it real. His reply came within minutes. First message, Elaine. Please don't do this. We can fix it. Second message, 4 hours later. You're being vindictive. Third message the next morning, you'll regret this. I didn't respond to any of them. You can measure a man by how quickly he turns from begging to threats. And Paul didn't even make it 24 hours. Marissa, on the other hand, waited 4 days. She showed up at the school where I used to teach. I guess she thought I still volunteered there. She caught me in the parking lot, wearing sunglasses and holding a latte like the past week hadn't happened. I stood there with my keys in hand, watching her walk up in 4-inch heels like she was auditioning for a role she'd already lost. I want to talk, she said. I don't, I replied. She hesitated, looked around. I know you hate me. No, I said. Hate takes effort. I'm just done with you. She crossed her arms. I was pregnant. You were also lying. The test said the child wasn't Paul's. I didn't make that up. I didn't know she snapped. I thought it was his. You thought wrong, I said, unlocking my car door. Like you always do. She grabbed my wrist. Not hard, but enough to make me stop. You ruined my life, she said. No, I said, looking her dead in the eye. I just stopped letting you ruin mine. Then I got in the car and drove off. See, that's the part they never talk about, the calm after revenge. It's not loud. There's no victory dance. It's quiet, lonely even. Because when you burn a bridge, you don't get to walk back across it later just because you changed your mind. I lost people. Some of my family, the ones who didn't understand or didn't want to understand, stopped calling. Said I humiliated everyone. That I should have handled it privately. As if their betrayal had been private. As if my pain had been tidy and polite. One of my sons, Jeremy, asked me if I'd gone too far. You could have just left him, he said over the phone. Why the show? And I told him the truth. Because I didn't want to just leave. I wanted to be heard. And I don't regret that. Not one word. Not one step. Not even the mess of it all. What I did next surprised even me. I took everything out of the house. Every picture. Every piece of furniture Paul had picked. Every shared towel. Every matching mug. Gone. I donated what I didn't burn. Left the house empty. Then I put it up for sale. No long explanations, just a clean listing. I moved into a lakeside rental 2 hours north. 1 bedroom. Bookshelves built into the walls. Quiet neighbors. No ghosts. But I wasn't done tying off the loose ends. There was one more part of the plan I hadn't told anyone. You remember those envelopes I put under the guests' plates? There was a 13th one. Unmarked, tucked inside the pastor's briefcase. It contained a letter, addressed to Paul. I'd given it to the pastor during rehearsal, told him not to open it, just deliver it to Paul the moment I left the room. He did, and in that letter I wrote, "You think you know what betrayal is, but you've only ever been on the winning side of it. This time you lost. And I watched you fall not out of cruelty but clarity. You weren't just unfaithful. You were careless with someone who loved you without condition. That's not something you recover from, at least not in this lifetime." And at the very bottom, in my neatest handwriting, "Goodbye, Paul." My silence was never weakness. It was the sound of a storm preparing. By the time they figured out how I'd orchestrated everything, the test, the envelopes, the legal lockdown, it was too late. The wedding had been for them. The aftermath was mine. I didn't hear Paul's voice again until a week after I'd moved into the cottage. It came through voicemail mid-afternoon, just as I was folding laundry. His voice was thin, beaten. He didn't even say hello. He just said, "You ruined me." No apology, no explanation, not even anger anymore. Just those 3 words. I listened to it twice. Then I deleted it. Because I hadn't ruined him. He did that all by himself. The only thing I did was make sure the lights were on when it happened so everyone could finally see the truth he'd tried so hard to hide. His downfall came faster than even I expected. You see, Paul had this image. A quiet man, dependable, well-read. Everyone liked him. People trusted him, especially at the college where he occasionally guest lectured after retirement. So when word got out, and it did quickly, that he had carried on a secret affair with his fiance's cousin, and that the affair had been publicly exposed at the wedding, that clean little reputation, it cracked like cheap porcelain. His guest lecturing offers dried up within a week. The academic board didn't fire him. He was technically freelance, but they stopped inviting him. That was enough. Then came the whispers. You know the kind. The kind that cling to a person's clothes like smoke. No matter how much you try to scrub them off, people still smell it on you. I didn't spread the rumors, but I didn't stop them either. Why should I? He built the fire. I just let the wind carry the ash. Marissa tried to pivot. That was her style. Always land on her feet. Always spin the narrative. First, she told everyone that Paul had manipulated her, that he'd preyed on her vulnerability after she lost her job, that she didn't know he was serious about me, as if living under my roof while I planned a wedding hadn't made things clear enough. Then when that didn't stick, she switched tactics, said I was cruel, cold, that I'd orchestrated it all for drama, like something out of a Netflix show she told one of our cousins. She even said I faked the paternity test. That one made me laugh, because I still had the sealed notarized copy, the one with the father's name in bold, clear type. And it wasn't Paul's. It was Daniel Cormier, a bouncer from Toronto she had a fling with one weekend when she was visiting friends. Paul didn't know until I mailed him the test results, along with a copy of her hotel receipts, and a post-it note that read, "You never even had her, Paul. She was just bored, like you." After that, he went quiet. Completely. No more texts. No more calls. Just silence. Which honestly suited me fine. I wasn't interested in dragging the story out. This wasn't about humiliation. It wasn't even about revenge anymore. It was about extraction. Pulling myself out of the wreckage and building something new. Something that belonged to me. The cottage became my sanctuary. It wasn't much: one bedroom, a small dock, a fridge that hummed a little too loud, but it was mine. I kept it simple. One bookshelf, one kettle, no television. I let myself sleep in. Woke up to loons calling over the lake instead of Paul's clinking coffee mugs. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since my boys were toddlers. Nothing fancy, just watercolors, trees, skies. The way light hit the water around dusk, there was peace in it, a kind of quiet that didn't ache. I started keeping a journal too, not to process the pain. I'd already done that, but to remember who I was when no one was looking. Because I had been so many things for so long, a wife, a mother, a teacher, a caregiver, that I'd forgotten who I was when I wasn't needed. What I found surprised me. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't fragile. I was clear. And that clarity, it changed everything. I got a letter from Paul's sister 6 weeks later. She and I were never particularly close, but we were polite, exchanged cards on holidays, small talk at family events. Her letter was handwritten. Careful. Inside, she wrote, Elaine. I don't know what happened between you and Paul exactly, just what people are saying. But I want you to know that whatever he did, he brought it on himself. You deserved better. You always did. I hope you're okay. And if you ever want to talk about anything, my door is open. I sat with that letter for a long time. Not because I needed her validation, but because it was the first time someone from his side of the world acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't crazy. I never responded. Not out of pride, just because I didn't need to. When you finally make peace with the past, you don't go back to dust off old ruins. You let them stay buried. One afternoon, I got a message from my younger son, Aaron. We hadn't spoken much since the wedding. He'd taken Paul's side in a way. Not out of loyalty, more out of discomfort. He said the whole thing had been too much. That I shouldn't have aired it all out like that, but now there he was, on my phone. Hey, Mom, just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't get it before. I do now. That's all he wrote. No long paragraphs, no grand reconciliation, but it was enough. Enough to let me know the truth had done its job. Not just for me, but for others too. You'd think the satisfaction would fade, that eventually the calm would turn to boredom, but it never did. Not once. Because satisfaction doesn't come from vengeance. It comes from knowing you didn't let them destroy you. It comes from getting your life back inch by inch without asking permission. I never told people everything. There are parts of the story I kept for myself. The moments I almost changed my mind. The way I stood in the mirror the morning of the wedding and whispered, "You're not weak." Not anymore. The trembling in my hands when Marissa stood up. The absolute stillness I felt when she said those words. I didn't react out of rage. I reacted out of readiness. Because when you live your whole life being overlooked, dismissed, softened for someone else's comfort, there comes a day when you remember who the hell you are. And when that day comes, you don't whisper it. You show it. Paul and Marissa. Last I heard, they weren't speaking. She had the baby. Alone. He tried to come back around a few months later. She sent him away. Guess even snakes get bitten when they lie too close. As for me, I'm still at the lake. Still waking up in silence that feels like a hug, not a punishment. Still making tea for one. And I've never not for one single moment regretted the way I let it all burn. You probably expect me to say the confrontation was the big moment, the explosion, the climax, the fire. But the truth is, it was quiet. Confrontation doesn't always mean screaming. Sometimes it's a soft knife. A truth delivered without rage. Just honesty and stillness. That's what makes it cut deeper. It happened 2 days after the wedding. I'd already gone no contact, changed my number, closed all the shared accounts, made it clear legally and emotionally that I was out. But Paul still tried. He showed up at the cottage. No call, no warning, just appeared in my driveway like the past didn't happen, like he had any right. I watched him from the front window for a moment. He looked smaller, not physically but spiritually. The man who once took up too much space in a room now stood with his shoulders rounded like even the trees around him couldn't be bothered. I opened the door. I didn't invite him in. "Elaine," he said, eyes pleading. "Please. Just give me 5 minutes." I nodded, stepped out, closed the door behind me. I wanted a barrier. Not just between us, but between him and the life I'd rebuilt since leaving. We stood by the edge of the porch. The lake behind me. his shame in front of me. "Why are you here?" I asked. His eyes darted, searching, like he was looking for the version of me that would rescue him. "She lied to me," he said. "Marissa, I didn't know about the other man. I thought I don't care what you thought." That stopped him. "I just wanted to talk," he said, quieter now. "I didn't know how to fix this." "You can't fix this," I said, "because I was never the one who broke it." He looked away, then back. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It got complicated. I was confused. Confused. That word again. The word men like him use when they want to take the sting out of betrayal. Like infidelity is a math problem they couldn't quite solve. "You knew exactly what you were doing, Paul," I said. "Every lie, every touch, every moment you snuck around with someone I loved. You chose it." "She came to me," he said quickly. "It wasn't—" "She came to you," I interrupted. "And you stayed. You answered. You kissed back." He didn't argue. Because he couldn't. Because deep down he knew I was right. I told him about the recording in the garage, the hotel receipts, the photos, the test, the envelopes, the entire trail I'd left for them to trip over. His face went blank. He finally realized the wedding hadn't been a last-minute unraveling. It had been a trap, set months in advance. I had known everything, long before he thought he was playing me. And still, I let it play out. Every step. Every lie. "Why didn't you just leave?" he whispered. "Because I wanted you to look me in the eye and see what you lost." He said nothing. "What hurts more?" I asked. "That I left, or that I never screamed?" He didn't answer, so I kept going. I didn't throw things, didn't beg, didn't break down. I just walked away. "And that's why you're here now, because you thought I needed you to feel whole." He looked at me, then and there it was, the first flicker of understanding. I was no longer the woman who needed his attention to feel seen. I was the storm he didn't see coming. He said he wanted to make things right, to take accountability, to start fresh. I laughed. "You're mistaking closure for reconciliation." "I don't understand. I'm not here for you, Paul. I'm here for me. This isn't a conversation. It's a goodbye." He looked like he wanted to cry, but no tears came. Just regret. Regret is quieter than sorrow. It doesn't scream. It sinks. I told him I forgave him. Not because he deserved it, but because I did. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about cutting the rope that's tied you to their damage. "You don't have to carry this," I said, "but don't pretend you didn't drop it in the first place." He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry, Elaine." I believed him, but it didn't matter anymore. Because the apology doesn't fix the harm. It just marks the end of the sentence. Before he left, he turned to me one last time. "Was there ever a moment," he asked, "where you still loved me? Even after you knew I looked at the lake behind him, at the calm water, the late summer light curling across the surface like silk?" "No," I said. "There was respect. There was grief. But love died the day I watched you choose convenience over character." Then I walked back inside, closed the door, didn't look out the window this time. That was the last time I saw him in person. I heard he moved back to his sister's place in Guelph. Tried therapy, deleted social media. I don't know if he's still in touch with Marissa. And frankly, I don't care, because what mattered wasn't the outcome of his life. It was the ownership of mine. The The confrontation didn't bring drama. No shouting, no chaos. It brought peace. Because when you speak your truth without asking for permission, when you look someone in the eye and tell them calmly, "You don't live here anymore," that's power. That's freedom. That's closure that no one can steal. The day after I closed that door on Paul, I did something I hadn't done in years. I slept in. No alarm, no plans, no reason to rise early except the sunlight crawling across my blanket. It felt indulgent, strange even. When you've spent your life caring for others, husbands, children, aging parents, you forget that mornings can belong to you. So I laid there letting the silence hum around me, realizing that for the first time in decades, I didn't owe anyone my energy. No breakfast to cook, no apology to rehearse, no explanation to smooth over, just me. And the gentle creaking of this old cottage like the walls were exhaling with me. I began to rebuild, not with grand gestures, not some sweeping transformation, but with small rituals. Morning walks by the lake, just me and the birds. A cup of strong coffee on the porch while the fog lifted. Painting watercolors on scrap paper I found tucked in the old dresser drawers. Little things that felt like myself. Not the version I had edited for others. Not the Elaine who asked for permission before making space. But the Elaine who remembered how to take up space. I didn't hear from Marissa for months. Not directly, but word got around. Through family, through neighbors, through mutual friends who didn't know how to mind their business. Apparently the baby came early, healthy, a girl. She named her Alina, not after anyone in the family, not a tribute, just a name she liked. She was raising her alone, though her mother, my Aunt Marie, had moved in to help. That shocked me. Marie was always tough, blunt, but maybe she saw in her daughter the broken pieces that came from being too much like herself. I won't lie. There were days I thought about the baby, wondered if she looked like our side of the family, if she had Marissa's sharp cheekbones or the stormy eyes that ran through our grandmother's line. But I didn't reach out. Not because I didn't care, because I cared enough to stay gone. Forgiveness doesn't require return trips, and I had nothing left to say to Marissa that hadn't already been said in silence. My own sons came around slowly. Aaron visited first. Drove up unannounced one Saturday afternoon. I spotted his car from the window and almost didn't open the door. Not out of anger, just weariness. But I did. And he hugged me, longer than usual. He didn't say I'm sorry outright, but he brought blueberry scones from the bakery I loved, and sometimes that's enough. We sat on the dock with our legs dangling, sipping tea and talking about nothing important. He asked how I'd really known. About Paul, about Marissa. I told him the truth. I knew the way women always know. We just pretend we don't because the world punishes us for knowing too much. He was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said, "I think I get it now," and I believed him. Jeremy took longer. He sent a card first, said he was still processing, that it felt like losing a second father even if Paul hadn't earned that role. He said he didn't blame me, but he didn't quite understand me either. That hurt more than I expected, but I let him be. Understanding isn't owed, not even from your children, especially not when you've had to teach them that a woman's silence isn't always a sign of consent. Sometimes it's just a strategy. A few weeks later, Jeremy did visit. He brought his daughter, my granddaughter, little Olivia with her crooked pigtails and her fascination with frogs. She wandered the garden while we talked. He apologized, this time clearly. "I should have stood by you," he said. "I was just overwhelmed. The way you handled it scared me." I nodded. "Because it showed you a version of me you hadn't met before," I said. He smiled sadly. "Yeah." I looked at him then, not as my son, but as a man trying to reconcile the image of his mother with the force she'd always hidden. And I said something I hadn't planned to say. "You know, I wasn't always like this. I had to become this woman because the world didn't leave me any other choice." He put his hand on mine. "I'm proud of you." It was the first time he'd said that since he was a boy. I kept living. I started volunteering at the local community center teaching art to women in transition. Some were leaving abusive relationships. Others were fresh out of shelters. A few were just lost. They'd sit in that small, sunlit room with brushes in hand, painting trees, rivers, portraits of the selves they hoped to become. And I'd sit beside them, listening, because that's what they needed. Not advice, just space to be heard. One woman, Jessica, once asked, "How did you stay so calm when they broke you?" I thought about it, and then I said, "Because I stopped trying to prove my worth to people who didn't value it in the first place." She nodded, then started painting her ex-boyfriend's house on fire. I didn't stop her. The cottage changed with the seasons. Summer turned to fall, and I watched the trees bleed color into the lake. There's something healing about watching things end on their own terms. Nature doesn't beg the leaves to stay. It lets them fall, makes room for new things. That's what I was doing too, making room, not for another man. I wasn't interested in being anyone's wife ever again, but for new joys, new mornings, new quiet that didn't carry weight. Sometimes people ask if I ever feel lonely, and the truth is, yes. Of course I do. There are nights I miss the weight of another body beside me, the comfort of shared laughter in the dark, the small things. But then I remember I used to feel lonelier in a full room, surrounded by people who claimed to love me but didn't protect me. Now, I am alone, but not abandoned. There's a difference. A big one. Paul never reached out again after that day on the porch. Last I heard, he was living alone. Tried dating again. It didn't go well. I suppose it's hard to find someone who doesn't Google your name these days. He'll survive. Men like him always do, but they do it in pieces. As for Marissa, she still lives in that small apartment with her mother. She started a blog about motherhood. Posts filtered photos of her and the baby with long captions about growth healing accountability. Not once has she mentioned me. But I see the guilt in her eyes in the few family photos I've come across. And that's enough. I don't need her to say my name. I just need her to remember it when she teaches her daughter what not to become. The aftermath didn't look like fireworks. It looked like slow, steady light, like a dawn that took its time. And I welcomed it. One day, one breath, one small, reclaiming at a time. About a month after the leaves turned, I got a letter from the lawyer. It was simple, short. A single page confirming the annulment had been finalized. There was a line in there that stuck with me more than I expected. Irretrievable fraud with intent to deceive. That's what it said. Legal language. Cold. Clean. No emotion. But I read that phrase over and over, because that's exactly what it was. Wasn't it? He hadn't just lied. He had intended to lie. Repeatedly. Carefully. Deliberately. They say love blinds you, but it's not the love that does it. It's the hope. It's what you think they could be if they just tried, if they just stopped, if they just remembered how much you've given them. But men like Paul never forget what you've given. They just count on it. They build their comfort on it, their freedom, their secrets. Until one day you finally stop handing it over and they act like you've changed. I hadn't changed. I had just finished giving. The annulment made everything official. The house was already sold. The accounts were already split. I didn't fight for much. I didn't need to, because I'd taken the one thing Paul valued more than any asset, his image. You see, I had learned over the years that Paul cared about appearances more than intimacy. He didn't love deeply, he loved being seen as a good man, a patient man, the kind of man women trusted. And I took that from him with one sentence at our wedding. Would you like to tell everyone who the Father actually is? Those words will live longer than anything he built for himself. I didn't ruin his life. I revealed it. A few days after the paperwork came through, I took a walk along the trail behind the cottage. It winds along the lake and into a small stretch of woods. No one's ever there, even on sunny days. It's the kind of place where the quiet feels personal. I brought the letter with me, folded, stuffed into my coat pocket like a secret I no longer needed to keep, and halfway through the trail I stopped. There's a spot where the trees break and the water stretches wide. I sat on the bench there, the one someone carved with initials long since forgotten. I unfolded the letter, read it once, then I tore it in half, not out of spite, out of closure, because the law had done its part. But I didn't need a document to know I was free. I needed to watch it disappear, so I shredded it slowly, fed it piece by piece into the water, letting it drift away like ash. Gone. Not buried. Not boxed. Gone. That night I poured myself a glass of wine, lit a single candle, not for romance, just for warmth. Then I opened the notebook I kept by the bed and started writing. It was a letter I'd never send, addressed to me. I wrote, "Dear Elaine, you did it. You got out. You didn't scream. You didn't break. You remembered. Remembered who you are. Remembered what you're worth. Remembered how strong silence can be when it's made of truth. You let them show themselves. You didn't force anything. You didn't chase closure from cowards. You rose, and no one will ever silence you again. Love you. Value." I closed the book, blew out the candle, and slept without dreams. The legal aftermath may have been quiet, but the social aftermath lingered longer. You know how small towns are. People whisper louder than they speak. Every time I went into town for groceries, I'd feel eyes on me. Some curious, some pitying, some respectful. They didn't all know the details, but they knew the ending, and they knew I'd ended it. One woman at the bakery stopped me on my way out. Her name was Ruth. We'd never spoken before. She said, "I watched you walk out of that wedding. I was sitting 2 tables from the head. I've never seen anything like it." I smiled politely. "Thank you." "No," she said. "Thank you for doing what most of us only dream of." Then she turned and walked off. I stood there in the middle of the sidewalk for a long moment, because that's when I realized my story had become something more than a scandal. It had become a lesson. Marissa, I later heard, tried to file for child support against Daniel, the real father. It didn't go well. He had moved provinces, had no stable income, no interest in being a parent. She tried to spin that too, of course. On social media, in little passive-aggressive posts, some men just can't handle strong women. But strength without integrity is just noise, and people were starting to hear the difference. I stayed off social media entirely. No Facebook, no Instagram. I didn't need to curate anything anymore because real peace doesn't require an audience. It doesn't need filters. It just is. The final stage of the aftermath came 6 months after the annulment. My sons Jeremy and Aaron offered to throw me a birthday dinner. Nothing fancy, just the 3 of us and their families. I agreed. We met at a quiet Italian restaurant in Kingston, halfway between their cities and mine. When I walked in, Olivia ran to me first, threw her arms around my legs and yelled, "Grandma Elaine." I knelt and hugged her, trying not to cry. Not because I was emotional from the past, but because I could finally feel the present again. Jeremy pulled out my chair. Aaron handed me a gift bag. Inside was a framed print, a watercolor landscape, my painting. They had taken one of the photos from my fridge when I'd sent Aaron as a text months ago and printed it professionally. "You're not just surviving anymore," Aaron said. "You're creating again." And for once I had no words, just a lump in my throat and a heart that didn't feel heavy. That night I walked back to my car with the painting in my arms and a warmth I hadn't felt since before Michael got sick, because for the first time in a very long time, I had nothing left to escape from. No lies at my back, no one walking beside me pretending to be something they weren't. Just me. Moving forward. Free. The first winter in the cottage was the hardest. Not because of the snow, not because of the cold, but because of the quiet. The novelty of solitude fades faster when the days get shorter, when the wind howls outside and you catch your reflection in a dark window and wonder how long it's been since someone said your name out loud. I decorated the cottage anyway. Hung a simple wreath on the door, baked shortbread cookies even though no one was coming. Lit a fire not because it was cold, but because I needed something alive in the room with me. I didn't put up a tree. Too many memories tied to ornaments that didn't belong to me anymore. Instead, I bought a single strand of white lights and strung them around the kitchen window. When I turned them on that first December night, I stood there in the silence and whispered to no one, "This is still joy." Paul sent a Christmas card. No return address. Just a plain white envelope that arrived on a Tuesday. The handwriting was still familiar. Precise. Uppercase. Inside was a folded piece of paper. No greeting, no dear Elaine. Just this I finally understand. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I think about what I did. Every day. I lost the only person who ever saw me clearly. I read it once, twice, then I folded it back up, lit a match, and watched it burn in the fireplace. Not out of anger, but because it didn't belong in this home. Some things can't be returned. And some doors once closed don't reopen. I never did hear what happened between him and Marissa after everything fell apart. Rumors, of course. She tried to rekindle things after the baby was born, claimed she missed the connection. He moved away again. Toronto, maybe. Started teaching night classes somewhere. But what I heard more than anything was this. They blamed each other. That's how you know they weren't in love. When it all comes crashing down and the first thing you do is point, not reflect, that's not love. That's convenience. And when convenience dies, all that's left is resentment. They weren't partners. They were accomplices. And without me as their shared secret, They had nothing left to hold them together. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it came all at once. The lake thawed in a single week. Birds returned like they'd been waiting just out of sight. My garden, which I'd ignored for months, burst open like it forgave me for the neglect, and I forgave myself too. That was the season I stopped thinking about revenge, stopped wondering if they regretted it, stopped reliving the moments over and over. Because at some point, pain stops being an event and starts being a choice. And I didn't choose it anymore. One morning in April, I got a call from my Aunt Marie. First time I'd heard her voice since before the wedding. "Elaine," she said softly, "I don't expect you to talk to Marissa, but I need you to know something." I sat on the porch, sun on my face, and waited. "She's not well." I said nothing. "She doesn't sleep, doesn't eat much, has trouble trusting anyone." I still said nothing. Marie sighed. "I'm not asking for sympathy. I just thought you should know, for yourself." Why I asked. She hesitated. Then, "Because you deserved better, and sometimes knowing the damage you didn't cause helps." I ended the call politely, then sat there for a long time, letting that sentence settle. She was right. Marissa was broken long before I exposed her. And Paul? He had been empty for years. None of that was mine to carry. I just stopped pretending not to see it. That spring, I started hiking again. A group of women from the community center invited me out one Saturday. I almost said no. I told myself I wasn't in the mood, that I'd go next time. But something in me whispered, "Go. Show up for the next version of yourself." So I did. It was muddy. My boots weren't quite up to the task. I nearly slipped twice, but I laughed. Really laughed. And that night I slept with the window open, wind in the trees, the sound of frogs croaking from the marsh, and I felt light. Not healed, not whole, just light enough to move forward. The following week, a woman named Cecile, early 60s, widowed, silver hair pulled back in a tight braid, asked me to join a book club. "We read fiction with bite," she said. "No fluffy romances." I grinned. "I think I qualify." It became a new ritual. Tuesday evenings. Wine and paperbacks and discussions that turned into stories about our lives. Women who had been cheated on, forgotten, passed over. Women who had survived. Some nights we didn't talk about the books at all. We just listened. And I realized something. The aftermath isn't about rebuilding what you lost. It's about building something that never existed before. Something stronger, wiser, realer. One night, Cecile told a story about her late husband's infidelity. He had a second family, she said, pouring another glass of Pinot Noir. Whole other woman, 2 kids. I didn't find out until he died. We all went quiet. "What did you do?" I asked. She smiled, slow and tired. "I grieved the man I thought I married. Then I lived." That line stayed with me, because I realized in a way that's what I'd done too. Paul never existed the way I thought. Not really. He was an invention, an echo of the man I wanted him to be. And once I stopped grieving that illusion, I started living. By the time summer rolled around again, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. The garden bloomed in full. The book club had doubled in size. I even taught a small class at the local library, storytelling for women who've been silenced. Every chair was filled. Some shared, some didn't. But all of them came back the next week. That's how you know you've built something real. Not when people clap, but when they return. There's a quote I once read, Some women fear the fire. Others become it. I used to be the former. Now I keep the matchbox in my back pocket and light candles for dinner even when I'm eating alone. Not because I'm trying to make anything feel special, but because I am. The aftermath of betrayal is not ruin, it's rebirth. And I walked through it without asking anyone to hold my hand, because I remembered what I'd been told my whole life, but never truly believed until now. I was always strong. I just needed a reason to stand up. I left the cottage on a Wednesday morning in early August. Not for good, just for a few days. There was a women's retreat up north near Halliburton. Nature writing workshops and quiet evenings around a fire. Cecile convinced me to go, said I'd earned it. I packed light. One duffel, a notebook, a pen I liked, and a small framed photo of my mother when she was young, strong chin-soft smile eyes that always saw more than she let on. As I zipped the bag closed, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. No makeup, hair pulled back, a plain shirt and jeans. And I realized I looked more like her than I'd ever noticed before. Not just in the face, in the way I stood. Rooted, unapologetic. There was a time I would have asked Paul if I looked all right before walking out the door. Would have worried if Marissa was wearing something nicer. Would have compared myself to every woman I passed. Now I knew exactly who I was walking into the world as, and I didn't need to ask permission. The retreat center was nestled between two lakes surrounded by sugar maples and pines. No cell service, no distractions, just the sound of the world remembering how to breathe. We were 12 women all over 50. Divorced, widowed, recovering, rediscovering. No pretense. No performances. Just honest presence. The first night we sat in a circle after dinner. Introduced ourselves. Shared something we'd left behind to be there. Some said grief. Others said guilt. When it came to me, I simply said, silence. A few women nodded. They knew. They all knew. The next morning, we hiked out to a small clearing for a journaling session. The facilitator, a soft-spoken woman named Mira, handed us prompts on small slips of paper. Mine read, "What would you say to the version of yourself who stayed?" I didn't write right away. I sat there for a long time just staring at the lake beyond the trees. The way the water caught the morning light soft and gold and endless. And then finally I began. To the woman who stayed. You weren't weak. You were loyal. You didn't know, not fully, not yet. But even when you did know, you stayed because love doesn't unravel overnight. You stayed because you thought you could fix it. Because you'd been taught that endurance is love, that holding on is strength. You stayed because you believed, and belief isn't a flaw, but leaving. That was your truest act of love for yourself. So I'm not angry at you. I'm proud, because even in the staying, you were becoming the woman who would one day walk away. I read it to the group later that evening. No one clapped. They just listened. A few women cried, and when I finished, one reached over and squeezed my hand. Not as comfort, as solidarity. I returned to the cottage with dirt on my boots and clarity in my chest. The kind you don't get from justice. The kind you only earn through endurance. There was a letter waiting for me in the mailbox. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting right away. Marissa. It wasn't long. 1 page. Written on pale pink stationery. Elaine. I won't pretend to deserve forgiveness. I've tried and failed to rewrite this in my mind 100 ways, but none of them erase what I did. I was jealous of you. You had a life that felt whole, and instead of building my own, I tried to steal yours. It didn't work. It never would have. I hope your peace is real, and I hope I can someday find mine. M. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel anger. Just a strange, distant ache. Not sadness for her, but for the years I wasted protecting her, believing in her, covering for her chaos. Still, I folded the letter gently, placed it in a drawer, not out of sentiment, but because even a burned bridge has its ashes, and sometimes those ashes deserve to rest. In late August, I sold a painting for the first time. A woman from the book club had brought her niece to the cottage one evening. The girl spotted a landscape on the wall, muted blues, autumn trees, a bend in the river. "Did you paint that?" she asked. I nodded. "Can I buy it?" I laughed at first, but she was serious. She handed me $200 in cash and took it home that night. I stood in the living room afterwards staring at the blank spot on the wall, and I felt proud. Not because it sold, but because it meant something to someone else. My story in colors, not words, had moved, and that's all I'd ever really wanted. Not applause, just movement. The last Sunday of summer, I sat on the dock with Cecile. We watched the sky shift from lavender to gold. Dragonflies hovered just above the water. Somewhere across the lake, someone was playing a harmonica. Cecile sipped her tea. "Do you think you'll ever fall in love again?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "I don't know if I want to fall." She smiled. "Fair." But maybe I added I'd walk beside someone, if the path was steady. She nodded. "Someone who doesn't need to be rescued." "Or rebuilt," I said. We sat in silence after that. But it wasn't empty. It was full of everything we no longer needed to say. Later that night, as I crawled into bed, I opened my journal again. And I wrote, "I used to think closure was a door that someone else had to shut. Now I know it's just a mirror. One you finally stop walking past. One you look into and say, you're still here, and you're going to be just fine." They still call me cold. Not everyone. But enough of them. It's in the way they pause when I walk into a room, the tight smiles, the conversations that shift mid-sentence. People I once called family. People I stood beside at funerals, birthdays, backyard barbecues. They don't say it outright, but I see it in their eyes. Elaine didn't have to go that far. She could have kept it private. She embarrassed him. Embarrassed all of us. And you know what? Maybe I did. Maybe I shattered their idea of what a good woman looks like. The kind who forgives quietly, who swallows betrayal with grace, who lets shame live behind closed doors. But I'm not that woman anymore. I'm not your polite silence. I'm not your whispered family secret. I'm the one who walked out of a wedding without looking back, and I would do it again. I think about that day sometimes. Not often. But when I do, it's not the betrayal I replay. It's the moment after, the second I stood up glass in hand and chose truth over comfort. I remember the quiet of the room, how it rang louder than any applause, because everyone in that moment knew what I had done. And they felt it. Not just the shock, the weight, the warning. You don't get to hold your power and be palatable. That's the truth women like me learn too late. They'll applaud your strength after the damage is done, after you've aged out of usefulness, after you've buried your softness. But when you stand up in the middle of your story and say, no more, they call you cold. As if protecting yourself is cruelty, as if survival requires an apology. A cousin I haven't spoken to in over a year sent me a message recently. Just a photo. me and Marissa, age 10, maybe 11, sitting on my front porch, knees, scraped arms looped around each other like we were tethered for life. No caption, no explanation, just the picture. I stared at it for a long time. I used to think that bond meant something unbreakable, but I've learned that family isn't made of blood or birthdays. It's made of boundaries. And when someone crosses those lines, knows they're hurting you, and does it anyway, you don't owe them your history. You owe yourself a future. So I didn't reply. I just archived it. Let the memory stay where it belonged. In the past. The town still talks. I know they do. Not every day, but in pockets. At the diner, in church pews, over fences while hanging laundry. They tell my story in bits and pieces. The woman whose cousin claimed she was pregnant with the groom's baby at her own wedding. The one who stood calmly, smiled, and dismantled them both in front of everyone. I've become a myth, a warning, a conversation starter. And it used to bother me. Now I see it for what it is. I'm not just a scandal, I'm a standard. Proof that it's possible to rise without theatrics. That you don't need to scream to burn the house down. Sometimes Olivia asks questions. She's 6 now, smart as a whip. Always watching, always listening. Why don't we ever see Aunt Marissa? I give her a simple version. We had a falling out, sweetheart. Like, you fought not with fists, I say. Just with truth. She nods like she understands. But one day she'll ask more. And when that day comes, I'll tell her everything. Not because I want her to take sides, but because I want her to know what a woman can survive. What a woman can choose. My sons have settled into the new version of me. They don't walk on eggshells anymore. They ask real questions. They come for advice. They no longer see me as just their mother, but as a person. Someone who made hard decisions. Someone who came out on the other side. We talk more now than we did in all the years I tried to keep the peace by staying quiet. Isn't that something? When I was bending for everyone else's comfort, they barely saw me. Now that I stand firm, they've never been closer. I hosted Thanksgiving this year, first time since the wedding. Smaller group. Just my boys, their wives, Olivia, and a neighbor couple who lost their daughter in a car accident years ago and had nowhere else to go. The table was quiet in the best way, full plates, full bellies, full hearts. Jeremy carved the turkey. Aaron did the dishes. And I just sat back, watched them, and thought to myself, this is enough. I don't need big gestures or perfect endings. I just need the space I made for myself to keep holding. Cecile gave me a bracelet last month. Simple silver, one charm, engraved with a single word, known. I wear it every day, not for fashion, but for the reminder, because I am known now. Not for who people wanted me to be. Not for the version that bent herself in half to keep everyone else whole. But for the woman who stood at the edge of betrayal and didn't flinch. The woman who walked out instead of breaking down. They still call me cold, but I don't hear them anymore. Because when you've been through fire and built a life from ashes, the opinions of people who watched it burn but never warned you. They're just noise. And my life? It's warm. It's quiet. It's mine. I was watering the basil on my windowsill when it hit me. This piece I'd built, this life that no longer demanded I shrink to fit inside someone else's comfort, it wasn't an accident. It was the result of every no I'd finally said. Every truth I refused to bury. every time I chose myself, even when it left me standing alone. It was earned, and it was enough. They say closure is a door, that once it's shut, you move on. But mine wasn't a door, it was a garden, something I had to tend to, weed out, water, let grow. I didn't just walk away from Paul. I reclaimed the ground he stood on, turned the ashes of that ruined wedding into soil, and from it I grew something beautiful. I forgave him in the end. Not with words, not in some dramatic letter or late-night phone call, but in the quietest way. By waking up one morning and not thinking about him at all. By walking past his name in my mind and feeling nothing. By looking in the mirror and seeing myself again, no shadows behind me. That's real forgiveness. Not a gift you give to someone else, but a release you give yourself. I never spoke to Marissa again. There was no final confrontation, no tearful reunion, no exchange of apologies over coffee. She remained what she chose to become, a stranger with my face in her childhood photos. I don't hate her. I just let her go. Some people are meant to be lessons, not lifelines. 1 year after the wedding, I hosted a dinner. Not a celebration, not a revenge tour, just a quiet gathering. The women from the book club, Cecile, a few new friends from town, Aaron and Jeremy too. Olivia brought me wildflowers wrapped in a grocery bag. We sat under the string lights I'd hung between the porch beams drinking wine and eating roasted vegetables from the garden. Someone asked me casually, "Would you ever get married again?" I didn't laugh. I didn't scoff. I just smiled and said, "Not to be loved." The table went still, and then slowly they nodded, because they knew what I meant. I'd found the kind of love I needed right here in the friendships, the family that stayed, the quiet I no longer feared, and the self I had rebuilt. Marriage was no longer the prize. Peace was. Sometimes I catch myself talking to my mother, especially when the wind shakes the windows or the kettle whistles too long. I tell her the things I never said when she was alive. That I was scared for a long time. That I stayed too long in places I had outgrown. That I finally stopped trying to fix people who broke me. And every time in my mind she just nods, as if to say, "I knew you'd get here eventually." There's a journal I keep now. It's full of letters to no one. Memories I've made space for. Moments that used to haunt me written down so they no longer own me. The final entry I wrote just last week. It reads, "Closure doesn't look like triumph. It looks like waking up on a Tuesday and making breakfast for one without bitterness. It looks like painting something with no intention to sell it. It looks like laughing at a memory that used to make you cry. It looks like saying, I loved, I lost, I learned, and I lived, and I have lived. Not just existed, not just endured, but lived. If I could go back, stand in that vineyard again, champagne in hand, listening to Marissa make her announcement, I wouldn't change a thing. Not the betrayal, not the silence that followed, not even the fire I lit when I walked away, because that day I didn't lose my future. I rewrote it. So, to the women listening, wherever you are, whoever you've been, I'll say this. You don't need anyone's permission to leave the table where love is no longer being served. You don't need proof to trust your gut. And you don't owe anyone your silence just because they can't handle your truth. Stand up, speak softly, and if needed, set the whole thing on fire. Because sometimes the ashes are the only place we can grow something real.